Brought to you by the Every Dollar app. Start budgeting for free today.
My partner and I here, we were talking earlier in the show, and we talk all the time around the office about this. Inflation, right? And just there is a natural progression of inflation over time. The Fed, just a kind of a quick review here because Jade's got a little something to share here today. So teeing you up here because everybody's heard about the Fed. Mm-hmm. Jerome Powell, unfortunately, has become a name that everybody knows.
Yeah.
And to his credit, the Fed is attempting, sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, but they are always attempting to keep inflation in that 2.5% range or so. And when it gets above that, they start paying attention. And this is where we get the monetary policy. And you all are paying attention to the headlines all the time when you see, are they raising rates? Are they dropping rates? All this kind of stuff. So it's always an interesting tension between wages. Are wages going up?
Are they outpacing the inflation?
Are they outpacing inflation? Very hard for that to happen over long term. So anyway, nonetheless, what do you got here? You got a little something for us?
Well, I'm trying to make heads or tails of all of it, right? Because it's like, we knew in 2022 that inflation was going bananas. Like, we felt it, the numbers were there, the data supported what we were feeling was true. But then we started to see inflation taper off, and
That's right.
we saw wages start to jump ahead. But yet we were still saying, oh, it's so expensive out there. It's so crazy. And so my thought was like, okay, what's really happening? Because, you're a guy that's following employment. You're following those numbers. And I'm looking at this graph here that I saw that really around March of 2023, a little earlier, wages really did start outpacing inflation at a decent rate. And I thought, okay, that means that we've got a little bit more margin back as American people. Where is this money going? So I started looking around. And, obviously we feel it at the grocery store. Like, that's the main place people say, oh my gosh, it's so expensive. And around about the time I was looking at this, I saw that NPR came out with a grocery study that basically said they followed the prices of groceries from 2019 until today.
Okay.
They went to Walmart and they picked, I believe it was 100 different items. And they said, we're going to track this over the course of 6 years, basically. And what they found is, on average, out of those items that they tracked, 21 of the items actually got cheaper. 27 products got more expensive, and the rest of them basically stayed the same. And when you think about it, you're like, okay, that's interesting. That's not as much as I would have thought. Like, I'm thinking everything has gone crazy, everything's exploding. And so again, I'm like, okay, things have started to taper out. What's going on with this money? We're also seeing articles that are saying, like, people are spending more on their credit card than ever before. But at the same time, like, investments are doing better than ever before.
Right.
So the question is there margin, and what are people doing with it? Is it true that wages are actually outpacing inflation? And from your point of view, what do you think about that?
Well, no, they're not, and they can't. It's unsustainable. So, for instance, if we look from a macro, so real big picture, wages can't outpace inflation on the regular because it just gets to be too much. Like so there's this give and take between wages. It kind of comes up and down. It's a bit of a roller coaster.
So even if you see it at a moment, you're saying it doesn't generally last.
It does not. So you don't want to get into an apples for apples is what I'm saying. The conversation, this idea that, well, inflation over the last quarter was this, so wages should have done that. It's not how that works. You're looking at the total. This is kind of a complex conversation, and I'm trying to keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
But, you can't force on companies this idea when you're in an inflationary period like we had been, if you go back about 2 years ago, and inflation's really, really high. You cannot expect companies to go, well, because inflation is up here, I got to raise everybody's wages, because that drives more inflation.
Right.
Because when they raise wages, they're raising their expenses, they pass those expenses. So you got to be careful is my point. So this back and forth and trying to keep that's not what you want. What's interesting about this article, as you were talking, that I saw, the reason why people feel and really see it at the grocery store. By the way, we saw this talked about in the media leading up to this last election.
That's right.
You saw it on MSNBC. You saw it on CNN and Fox. My point is, it didn't matter what side of the aisle. Everybody was feeling the pinch on a lot of consumer goods. And this is what's interesting. If you look at 2019, so this is right before the pandemic. Remember, just kind of a quick history lesson, because this is crazy. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
No, it doesn't.
But here we sit, almost 5 years. We're almost 5 years to the day, not quite, but 5 years, a couple weeks, when the pandemic really begins to hit the U.S.
March.
That's when it started going bananas, but we now know it was at the Super Bowl.
That's right.
in Miami.
Right.
You know, we nobody knew.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the point. So if we're January 2025, if you go to December 2019, U.S. prices cumulatively are up 23%. That's where people are feeling it. For instance, a 4-pound bag of Domino sugar now costs $4.46. That's 74% more
than 2019.
Compared a dozen eggs, $4.90. That's 83% more. Tide liquid. I could keep going on and on. Why? These are the staples. So when you're buying these every week, these aren't your splurges.
Yeah, you feel it.
So that's interesting.
So, well, that's I mean, it goes back to our conversation earlier when we were talking about the tariffs and new administration and that sort of thing. If we were feeling it before and it was because of other issues, back then, right now they're saying the prices are up because of, all sort. It could be utilities and insurances for businesses to run. And so they're passing that on along to the consumer. It could be extreme weather, right, with crops. And so because of that price is passing on to the consumer. But then if you add, I don't know, other things coming into this. So you're saying, basically what you're saying is, no, the consumer has every right to feel this. And even if they have...
It's real.
Yeah.
So here's what's happened. You can't get all hung up in inflation cost per month because what happens is you have large spikes. So back to the quick timeline. This will be helpful for folks. We go into the pandemic, Jade, starts in, let's call it 2020, early 2020. And the whole world shuts down. All right. So in that moment, you did have multiple, let's call it storms, converging for a massive, once in a generation, I hope, financial storm.
Yeah.
One, the scarcity, because we had supply chains interrupted. The whole world shut down for a while. Every state was different. Every country, it was like, what are we doing? Secondly, demand did increase a couple months in when people started going, okay, I'm at home, I'm working from home, but I got to have food. Remember, we saw liquor stores, things spike.
Went crazy.
So here's what happened. This is interesting. So all of that comes into natural economic factors, which makes demand higher and scarcity, and that created an increase. Here's what this article says, and it's absolutely right. I'm reading from this article, big price increases are rarely followed by equally big price decreases.
That's right.
Well, it's like, that's what I want to tell everybody.
It's not going to go back to what it was.
That's the key point. While the inflation rate has cooled, your $4 sugar is here to stay.
It's not leaving.
That's what's unfortunate.
Well, that's
unless you get into depressionary and very serious recessionary forces, that can make those go down. But by and large, if we stay in a somewhat healthy economy, Jade, these prices are here to stay.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's gone up 25%, but over the last year, it's gone up less than 1%. So it's not still climbing that ridiculous rate.
Good news, bad news.
Yeah.
Good news is inflation, as we see it, has cooled. Bad news is companies don't just go, well, you know what? For the last 5 years, people have been paying $4.66 for this sugar, and we used to sell it for only $2. Let's go back to that.
They're not going to go back.
And so there comes in the evil capitalism cries and the rub between, and by the way, this is the tension that exists in America today.
Absolutely.
Is people go, wait a second. You used to charge me this. Now you're charging me this.
Come on. Think about it.
And so there's the tension.
Sam and I went out to dinner, and everybody has the menus on the screen now that you do the QR, which I hate.
I'm tired
because
of that.
it makes you get your phone out at dinner.
Not going to those
But they figured
places.
out that was one of the things that they figured out. This is a lot cheaper for us, and we ain't going back.
Yeah, they're not going to print menus. You know what else they figured out? Go to the coffee shop in my neighborhood. Sweet little gal makes me a coffee, then turns the screen and goes,
"Would you like a tip?"
I feel like going, no. I just want my coffee.
Whew.
This is the Ramsey Show.
Create your free every dollar budget today, the simplest way to budget for your life.